Warning, this episode contains graphic content that may be disturbing for some of our listeners.
Well, hi there. We're really glad you found us. This is Off the Record, an FBI agent's perspective. This our podcast deals with a variety of crimes that have occurred during the career of our co-host, retired FBI Special Agent Harry Trombitas. Of course, we also look at a lot of other things surrounding that, from things that Harry has learned and experienced during his career. We examine some safety issues and things like that. But of course, we also take a look at the crimes that Harry investigated. We're going to do that today. You know, the hunter becomes the hunted is beyond cliche. It's actually kind of a parody, you know, when someone uses that. But in this case, that's kind of what happened. We are going to take you to a variety of different locations in the rural backwoods areas of the Midwest as a serial killer. He is on the hunt and carrying out his crimes in Ohio in the late 80s, early 90s. And Harry, you got involved in this one in 1992. How did the hunt for Thomas Lee Dillon start for you?
Yeah, thanks, Clark and Jessica. This is one of the most interesting cases that I worked in my career. It's another serial murder case. I think we already talked about one with the pheasant hunters in one of the earlier episodes. But this was another case that absolutely captured the attention of the nation. I remember all the different crime shows that would constantly give an update about this case. And so, I mean, it was something that affected the lives of so many different people, not only the victims and their families, but hunters and fishermen that saw that their like were getting killed by an unknown person. They were afraid to go out hunting. They were afraid to go fishing because they were afraid they might be the next victim. So it really was a very dramatic case, I think. And it again talks about the teamwork done by the little task force that we had formed, and the involvement of the profiling unit and the media, and reliance on citizens to call in tips. So this case actually kind of demonstrates, that perfect storm of how everything comes together for good. And my involvement happened, like Clark mentioned, on March 14th of 1992. I was sitting at my desk in the FBI office doing some paperwork, surprise, surprise, on the paperwork. But I get a call from the Coshocton County Sheriff's Office, and they said, "Hey, we had a homicide on federal property." I didn't even know we had federal property in Coshocton. And they said, "Yeah, at the Wills Creek Dam reservoir area, we had a guy that was fishing, and somebody shot him in the back. He's dead. We're processing the scene now, but clearly this is something that the FBI would have an interest in." So I immediately shut down what I was doing and was out the door, drove to Coshocton, which, was a little over 80 miles. So it's about an hour and a half away. And I was following the directions to the sheriff's office, that I had written down. Keep in mind, I didn't have GPS and all that kind of stuff, those convenient little maps to follow. So you had to use, at least I did. I don't know if other people had it yet, but, the Bureau was always one of the last to adopt to new technology. So, but anyway, I made it to the sheriff's office where I met some of the detectives, and one in particular was Captain Dane Shryock. And he and I would become fast friends and basically hooked at the hip during this entire investigation. And I consider Dane to be probably the most important person that was on this task force. And I'll explain as we go along here. But I showed up at the office and sheriff's office, and Dane met me, and he took me for a ride out to the crime scene. Of course, Mr. Hawkins' body had already been removed. The detectives that were there had already looked everywhere, processed the scene, they knew he was shot. There was one bullet hole in Claude's back. And but they couldn't find a shell casing. And they tried to figure out about where the shot would have occurred. And the roadway was kind of up on a little bit of a hill, and you had to walk down through some woods to get to the reservoir where Claude was fishing on some rocks, standing on some rocks. And so somebody came up, must have saw him down there, standing there fishing, and parked their car, walked into the woods a little bit, and then took a shot at him, and unfortunately hit Mr. Hawkins in a critical area, and he passed away at the scene. So, we thought it was strange that we couldn't find a shell casing. We have had metal detectors out looking for it, could not find one. And as we're driving back to the sheriff's office, Dane says, I remember that we had a couple of unsolved homicides in some surrounding counties. And he said, I wonder if those cases have ever been solved. And he said they were from a couple of years ago, but he said, I've never heard anything more about it. So we went back to the office, and Dane started doing some research and calling around. And we found out that there were actually 3 other homicides that had occurred prior to Mr. Hawkins getting killed. One was an individual by the name of Donald Welling in Tuscarawas County. And again, keep in mind that all of these cases are going to be centered pretty much in the southeastern side of the state of Ohio. But Donald Welling was out walking along a roadway. He liked to go for walks in the morning and that, and apparently somebody came by and shot him. And, of course, in a rural area like that, you don't have a lot of traffic. So it took a while before somebody else came by and found Mr. Welling laying in the roadway and appeared to be suffering from a gunshot wound and had already passed away. So this person contacted the Tuscarawas County Sheriff's Office. They responded and processed the crime scene. And so that was an unsolved homicide. They assumed that it was a hunting accident. This was a very rural area. People are out hunting. Sometimes they miss what they're shooting at, or they think they see a deer, and it turns out to be a person. I mean, we've had those kinds of incidents before. So at the time, the Tuscarawas County, they kept their case open, but chalked it up to maybe a hunting accident. So that was one of the first cases. That was on April 1st of 1989. Then about a little over a year and a half later, there was a young man by the name of Jamie Paxton in Belmont County. It was November 10th of 1990. So about a year and a half again after Mr. Welling's homicide. Jamie's out in a rural area. He parks his vehicle. He takes a walk up a little hill, and he's basically scouting areas that he wants to try to hunt in. And so apparently while he was up there walking around, somebody came along, shot him from, a fairly close distance, certainly not, within a few feet, but probably a 30 or 40 yards away, and shot him once in the back, and then he got shot in the back of the knee, and then also in the butt. And by the time somebody found him, he was deceased. And of course, the Belmont County Sheriff's Office was called, and they responded and processed the scene. They also couldn't find any shell casings. Same thing in the Welling case, and in the Claude Hawkins case, no shell casings. So they assumed again that it might have been some kind of a hunting accident. They just weren't sure. They kept the case open, but this particular case was interesting because the mother of Jamie Paxton, Jean Paxton, was obviously just devastated that her son was shot and killed by somebody, and that nobody took Nobody came forward and took responsibility for killing her son. So what she decided to do was to write letters to the Times-Leader newspaper, which is in Belmont County. And she would do like little editorials kind of things, comments about how this shooting, was committed by a coward, how much Jamie was a wonderful young man. Everybody liked him, and this coward now has ended his life and destroyed her family. And she would write numerous letters to the Times-Leader. And of course, that was big news in that Belmont County area. And they would publish her letters in that. So the letters were pretty prominent. And, again, for anybody that happened to subscribe to the newspaper, they could see Mrs. Paxton's just devastation over losing her son in that. So it had quite an effect on people. And about 3 weeks later, there was a homicide in Muskingum County. A gentleman by the name of Kevin Loring was shot and killed on November 28th of 1990. He was out with a hunting party, and they split up, and they decided each to go cover a particular area. Well, and then they were going to meet back at their vehicles where they parked before it got dark. And so everybody split up, and sure enough, Mr. Loring heads in one direction, but he doesn't come back to the cars when it's starting to get dark. And everybody thought that was weird, but it's dark now, and they had no idea. You can't go out and look for somebody in the dark like this. So they thought they'd wait till the next morning. And sure enough, they go out and look for him, and somebody finds him. And Mr. Loring was found laying on the ground. He was deceased. The whole top of his head was blown off. His hat was 10, 15 feet away. So clearly somebody shot him in the head. And it was, again, a tragedy that hit, the whole Muskingum County area. Mr. Loring happened to be from another area of the country, and he was just in town hunting with his family and some of his friends. And then this happens. And again, it appears to be a hunting accident, but nobody has taken responsibility.
Can I, Harry, real quick, Jamie Paxton was shot multiple times. The other two victims so far have only been shot once. And you can see where that might be interpreted as a hunting accident, but 3 times. Was that a red flag to investigators at the time?
Yeah. And I didn't mention that, Clark. I appreciate you pointing that out, but yeah, Jamie Paxton's was a little bit different in the sense that, like you said, he was shot once in the back of the knee, and then once in the butt. And so clearly, when the Belmont County Sheriff's Office was investigating, they realized that was probably a purposeful homicide. And, no hunting accident.
But there's
a victim shot 3 times.
Correct. Yeah. But there's still no discernible link between these 3.
I mean, nobody saw anything. There's no shell casings. So Mrs. Paxton's writing these letters to the Times-Leader, and
back then, these letters were pretty popular. Like, people were reading the newspaper. It was common to write letters to the editor. People read them, talked about them. So these are going all around the community.
absolutely.
And I want to ask another quick question so we can gauge how large the community is. How far apart did all of these homicides take place? If you're looking at like a map, kind of.
Yeah, they're all spread out. If you can imagine, in southeastern Ohio, central southeastern Ohio, there's some distance between them. I'm not going to say that they're hours away from each other, but probably I'm guessing an hour's drive between each one. Really, they were not committed in the same county, and so law enforcement tends to work their own particular location or region. And they, at the time, we didn't have these different networks and all these kind of things that we could send out alerts throughout the area through NCIC or leads or whatever. And so usually a crime that was committed in a particular county stayed within that county unless somebody made an effort to communicate outside the county about something going on. And the same thing, the newspaper would write about what happened in their particular area. And so each of the counties, newspapers and that focused on their own crime. They weren't really aware of or publicized the other incidents that were occurring at the time. It's not like it is today where everybody shares these stories. An unusual homicide occurs, and I mean, the whole country knows about it. So
it made sense that they were isolated almost and thought of as isolated incidents.
Absolutely. And so you can't blame the detective necessarily. They weren't aware. Nobody told them about these other incidents and that. So anyway, Mrs. Paxton again has written these letters, and about a year passes, and lo and behold, we get the Times Leader received an anonymous letter. It was addressed to the Times Leader, and whoever at the Times Leader newspaper opened it up. And I'm going to read you the letter, and so that everybody can hear what was said. It was addressed to the editor, and it said, "Dear editor, I am the murderer of Jamie Paxton. To prove that this is not a crank letter, here are 2 facts known only to the murderer. 1, the weapon used was a .308 bolt action rifle with 165 grain soft point bullets. After each shot, I pulled the bolt halfway back and removed the fire casing and put it in my pocket. This is why no shell casings were found at the murder site. 2, Paxton was driving a late 1970s Chevy, either beige or light yellow in color, which was parked on the east side of the road headed northbound. 1 year ago this Sunday, I killed Jamie Paxton. This letter is directed to all concerned with this murder." And it says to Sheriff McCourt. And Tom McCourt was the sheriff at this time. And it said, "Don't feel bad about not solving this case. You had no clues of any kind to start your investigation. You could interview till doomsday everyone that Jamie Paxton ever met in his life, and you wouldn't have a clue to my identity. The reason? Jamie Paxton was a complete stranger to me. I never saw him before in my life, and he never said a word to me that Saturday. The motive for the murder was this, the murder itself. With no motive, no weapon, and no witnesses, you could not possibly solve this crime."
Wow.
Paxton was killed because of an irresistible compulsion that has taken over my life. I knew when I left my house that day that someone would die by my hand. I just didn't know who or where. This compulsion started with just thoughts about murder and progressed from thought to action. I've thought about getting professional help, but how can I ever even approach a mental health professional and blurt out in an interview that I've killed people? And in parentheses, he put, Paxton was not the only one. Technically, I meet the definition.
Wow.
I meet the definition of a serial killer. And in parentheses, it says 3 or more victims with a cooling off period in between, which is the definition that we've talked about before in our podcast.
Yeah.
But I'm an average looking person with a family, job, and home, just like yourself. Something in my head causes me to turn into a merciless killer with no conscience. 5 minutes after I shot Paxton, I was drinking a beer and had blacked out all thought of what I had just done out of my mind. I thought no more of shooting Paxton than shooting a bottle at the dump. It's like 2 people live in my head, one a normal person and the other a heartless killer. I feel no exaltation for baiting the capture for this heinous crime, but only disgust and loathing for myself for joining the ranks of other serial killers like Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, and Henry Lee Lucas. And he says, to the Paxton family, you deserve to know the details of November 10th, 1990. At about 8:30 a.m., I came upon Jamie on that hill. He was barely visible over the crest of the hill. I was very drunk, and a voice inside of my head said, do it. I stopped my car behind Jamie's and got out. Jamie started walking slowly down the hill toward the road. He never looked directly at me or said a word to me. He appeared to be looking past me at something in the distance. I was carrying my .308 along my right side where he couldn't see it. I raised the rifle to my shoulder and lined him up in the sights. I took at least 5 seconds to take careful aim. He never showed any indication of seeing me. I aimed a little to my left to allow for him moving from my right to left. My first shot was off a little, and it hit him in the right chest. He groaned and went down. I wanted to make sure he was finished, so I fired a second shot aimed halfway between his hip and shoulder while he was prone on the ground. I jerked the shot and hit him in the knee. He raised his head 6 inches off the ground and groaned again. My third shot also missed and hit him in the butt, but he never moved again. There were never any shots fired at point blank range, as I was never closer than 100 feet to Jamie. The coroner was mistaken about his analysis. Apparently the coroner had given his thoughts about where the shot had occurred and that, how far away it was. I know you hate my guts, and rightfully so. I think about Jamie every hour of the day, as I'm sure you do. I was at the scene of the crime last Easter about 11 a.m. You must have just missed me. I've also visited Jamie's grave at Union Cemetery. It is a very beautiful sight, and the inscription and picture of Jamie on the black headstone are a work of art. I knew before I fired those shots that day that my victims had family and friends, but your son is the only one of the victims I feel pity for. To his fiancee, Diane Verardi, read Christian Rossetti's poem, Remember, when you think of Jamie. And then it goes, yeah.
I can't. This is so hard.
Yeah, it is. Then he goes on and he says, the what, with, what, and where have all been revealed. However, the who can never be discovered unless I choose to turn myself in. This would serve no purpose at this time. And I want our listeners to remember that line, this would serve no purpose at this time, because it's going to come into play later on in this case. Clearly, I committed aggravated murder and would be sentenced to death. I knew the difference between right and wrong at the time and was sane. I've had dozens of opportunities since that November day to kill others in Ohio and other states and chose not to. Maybe the disgust of my good half felt about the Paxton killing made what was dominant over the bad half. Again, it's a little hard to read because the fax copy here was dominant over my bad half and wanted to quit. Stopping my excessive drinking also contributed, because when I'm sober, I don't think of killing. Let's all hope that this will be the end of the killing, but at this point, I don't know. I mailed this letter only because I felt the Paxton family should know the details of what happened. I don't believe that they should live the rest of their lives without knowing. This is the only correspondence you will ever receive from me. Signed, the murderer of Jamie Paxton.
Oh, that is cold-blooded.
Yeah, it was interesting at the time when that letter came in. Of course, I think if I recall correctly, the letter was published in the local newspaper, and that it was probably heavily redacted. But of course, once again, nobody outside that county really knew anything about it.
Can I ask a question? So I find this letter both cold-blooded, as Clark said, but also very insightful. And I feel like maybe going backwards, right? You don't know much about this person yet. I feel like for the profiling unit, this is like really insightful into the mind of like why someone kills and what causes that. And to me, that's utterly fascinating, the way he describes it.
Yeah, it was certainly very insightful, but keep in mind at the time, we weren't sure if that was the actual killer or somebody within the investigation that knew some of these details. Remember,
Got it.
remember there was and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but remember the person that wrote the letter made it a point to say, Dear Sheriff McCord, this isn't your fault that this case hasn't been solved. You would have no idea. It was almost like,
A taunting.
well, not only a taunting, but maybe somebody inside was trying to explain why this case hadn't been solved.
Hmm.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that perspective.
Yeah.
And
Didn't see that.
again, I'm not saying that everybody believed that, but that, that was one of the thoughts that had come up. And again, we'll get into this in a little bit, but
Yeah, because we're looking at it backwards. We're looking at it because you've told us this is the killer that's written this letter. But at the time,
Yeah.
no one knew that for certain.
yeah, and if I said that we knew immediately that it was the killer that wrote this letter, I misspoke.
No, you probably didn't. I
No,
just
you didn't.
now that we're looking at it backwards,
Right.
I'm like, okay, well, the killer wrote this. But
Yeah.
I forget sometimes when we were going back through these cases that at the time you didn't have that information.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, that's a good point. And, so hindsight clears everything up. But at the time, for us investigators, you got to keep in mind, we got to weigh all the factors in that. And so we were talking about this case with the other investigators and really felt that most likely these cases were connected. And then about 3 weeks after the Claude Hawkins homicide, we had a fifth homicide. And Gary Bradley was shot and killed on April 5th of 1992 while he was fishing in Noble County. And it was the same kind of a situation. He was by himself. He was alone. He was fishing. He was out in a rural area, and somebody came by and shot him. And I remember getting the call that we had another shooting. So the next day, I decided to drive out to Noble County, and I was supposed to meet with Sheriff Landon Smith and at his office. And so I remember driving out there. I remember parking out in front of the sheriff's office. Again, it was just an old house, basically. And the upstairs apparently contained a couple of jail cells. But the downstairs, you'd walk in the front door, just like walking into somebody's house, basically. And you start walking down the hallway. I could see the dispatcher sitting at a desk at the far side of the hallway there. And I'm walking towards them, and I see this sign that says, "No state troopers allowed past this point."
Oh.
I thought that was an interesting comment. And I later found out there was a reason for that. Landon Smith was a little upset at the state patrol at that point.
Oh, this
okay.
is not a joke.
And
This is a for real. If you have a state trooper badge, bye-bye.
You don't come back. I'm thinking to myself, well, hell, if he feels that way about state troopers, what about the FBI?
Yeah, like you're already the not favorite on anyone's list.
So anyway, I continue to walk up towards the counter to let
Testing the sign.
yeah, and I kind of see this guy sitting on a bench off to me. He's wearing a flannel shirt, jeans, and I think he had a cowboy hat kind of thing and a straw hanging out his mouth. I don't remember all of it, but I went up to the dispatcher, and of course, I'm not dressed up like in a suit. I'm wearing, golf shirt and jeans, which was my typical, where when I was
FBI casual. That's the look.
FBI
It's the
casual.
resort collection.
Oh,
It's for vacations only.
the last thing you know, you want to do is fit that stereotype of the FBI agent in the three-piece suit, and that was not me. I wanted to dress like the locals, but respectful. It wasn't like I wore an old T-shirt of some kind. So anyway, I walk up to the desk and I said, "Yeah, hi, I'm Harry Trombitas with the FBI. I'm here to talk to Sheriff Smith." And the guy at the desk goes, "That's me." Or the guy on the bench goes, "That's me." And I said, "Sheriff Smith, I'm here to, work with you on this case." And then he goes, "Come on, let's go for a ride." He puts me in we go into his vehicle. And I remember, and I'm not exaggerating, but I'm in the front passenger seat. Sheriff Smith is driving. And you got to keep in mind, some of these counties are poor. They don't have a whole lot of money in that. So you're not going to necessarily see brand new vehicles and things like that in the fleet of a sheriff's office and that. So I remember sitting in the front passenger seat and I'm looking down at the floorboard and I swear I can see the road.
Oh dear.
Oh no.
Under my feet. There was just a little thin area, and I'm going, man, this is a poorer county. And so anyway, but Landon was fun. He was funny, nice guy. I enjoyed working with him and his people. But Landon takes me out to the scene and he shows me where Gary Bradley was shot and killed, where he was found. We walked around in that area, and Sheriff Smith said, we looked all over. We haven't found a shell casing or anything. Nobody saw anything. And I remember telling him, I said, "Sheriff, I think this may be connected to some other homicides that we're taking a look at. And most recently, the one in Coshocton County at Wills Creek Dam." And so at that point, Noble County became part of our task force. I remember Sheriff Smith had one of his investigators work with us on that. So now we have these 5 homicides. And again, started to go into this before, but we believe that all the cases were similar, most likely committed by a single offender. And you think about why a single offender? Because number one, they were so similar. And number two, it most likely would not be 2 or 3 people, because typically somebody in that group shoots their mouth off and gets drunk at a bar and says, "Hey, we killed that guy the other day." And that's how a lot of cases get solved, because
Really?
people can't keep their mouths shut. And they tell somebody, "Don't tell anybody, but I'm going to tell you this."
Yeah, really think about your accomplices here. Really, really contemplate who your accomplice might be in a crime.
So we knew that most likely it had to be a single offender. All the victims were alone at the time of the attack. The victims were engaged in an outdoor activity, hunting, fishing, or walking. All victims were in remote areas of the county. 3 were shot on a Saturday, 1 on a Sunday, and 1 on a Wednesday, again, the day before Thanksgiving. So again, a lot of people take that time off. 2 of the victims were shot with some type of a .30 caliber weapon. 2 were shot with some type of a 6.5 times 55 caliber weapon. That was Hawkins and Bradley were both shot by that kind of a weapon. And the one victim that had his head blown off, the front of his head, top of his head blown off, we couldn't tell what kind of weapon that was. I mean, that could have been a number of different kinds of weapons, because there was, so much destruction in that.
You couldn't see where the bullet hole would have gone in or come out, or.
Well, there was nothing left.
Yeah. There's no entry point left. Yeah.
We knew he was shot in the front of the head, but there's just no bullet fragments or anything like that in there. So then we had all were low risk victims. One thing I didn't tell you was Claude Hawkins was a black male. The rest of the guys were white men. And one of the things we looked at was, okay, could this have been a racially motivated crime? And so Dane and I and the other investigators with Coshocton County Sheriff's Office went and interviewed the family, the neighbors. We went to Mansfield to interview Claude's co-workers. Did Claude have any enemies? No. I mean, everybody loved him. He was a great guy. Nobody stepped forward and said anybody had any problems. We figured out that Claude did not have any enemies. I mean, he was just a good guy and a good family man. And somebody shot him while he was fishing, and it was a horrible thing. But we did look into the possibility that some of these guys may have had people that were upset with them. And we looked into all of those things, and we couldn't find any reason why any of these individuals would have been picked on or shot by somebody who was upset with them, for example. All were shot from a relatively short to medium distance. So again, they weren't real far shots, but they were kind of medium range, probably 30 to 50 yards away, that kind of thing, which when you have a rifle, and that's really not a difficult shot. Those were the similarities that we had. The only evidence that we had were the bullet fragments that were recovered from the different bodies. We had bullet fragments that were recovered from victims Welling and Paxton were 30 caliber. They had 4 lands, 4 grooves, right hand twist. That's kind of like, for a lot of the people that are familiar with guns, that's the rifling that's in the barrel. That's what causes the bullet to spin. When the barrel is bored, and that the manufacturer makes the barrel, cuts these spirals in the barrel so that when the bullet is fired, it travels down the barrel and it's spinning. And that spinning is what makes it stay on target and go where you're aiming in that. So, and there's different kinds of, different numbers of lands and grooves, depending on what kind of weapon. Right hand twist just means it's cut to the right. There's a right hand twist, and some weapons could have a left hand twist. So it's all depending on the manufacturer and the type of the weapon and that. So they had Welling and Paxton were killed with a 30 caliber. Bradley and Hawkins were killed with 6.5 times 55 caliber. And like I said before, there were no bullet fragments recovered from Mr. Loring because his head was so badly damaged. So with the letter that we had and the bullet fragments, we decided to go ahead and contact the FBI profiling unit. And keep in mind, I had some training with the profiling unit. And so I was a little familiar with how they work, what materials they needed, and that. I sent the letter down to them to show them what we had received, and along with the investigative reports and everything. And they had some time, they took some time to review the material and that. And then they were ready to provide us with what they thought would be their profile. And they wanted to come out, we wanted them to come out and in person. And so we arranged a meeting at the Columbus office of all the investigators that were involved in the little task force that we had set up, and the FBI profiling unit. They sent 2 agents, FBI agents, that were in the unit along with an analyst. And these guys, Larry Ankrum was one of the agents. Steve Etter was a second agent that came out, and Jim Bell was the analyst that came out. And all of these guys had great experience in working, homicide cases and serial murder cases and that. And there was a sense of urgency that we had because, as far as we knew, these killings were going to continue. And we had to do something to try to identify who this person was. By now, the media had picked up on these different homicides, and that we as a task force were looking at these cases as being related. As I mentioned, they were portrayed on national TV. We had a number of different shows, crime shows that came in to kind of cover the stories and that as we were going along. And it was a mystery. We had no idea who was responsible for this. We had no eyewitnesses. We established a tip line for people to call in, and people would call in and give us information about people that they thought might be related or to the homicides. And a lot of them were disgruntled ex-girlfriends or ex-wives that wanted to dime out their boyfriend or their husband, ex-husbands, and cause them trouble. So they would give us the names, and of course we'd have to go out and interview them and look into it, but none of them had come to, the attention of us right now. And so we had this meeting with the profiling unit, and we were able to put together a profile. And the profile that the profiling unit put together, and with our input in that, was basically the following. The shooter was not a marksman, but he could have been affected by drugs or alcohol. And the reason why they said that was because, these were not all perfect shots. If you recall, in Jamie Paxton's murder, for example, it took 3 shots in order for the killer to murder Jamie. I didn't mention, but in the Gary Bradley case, there were 2 shots. It took 2 shots to kill him. And our belief was that a marksman would have been able to do the job in 1 shot, but instead it took a couple of different shots to do the job. 2 of the cases, again, it took multiple shots to kill the victim. At least 2 different weapons were used, again, the .30 caliber, the 6.5 times 55. So that means that the shooter has access to multiple weapons. The shots were fired from relatively short to medium distances to the victims. And except for the Lauren case, where it was a headshot where the top of his head was blown up, all victims received body mass hits, meaning somewhere in the body mass, the main body mass of the person. The suspect takes advantage of victim opportunity. Again, doesn't seem to ever pick somebody that's out with another individual. These are all individuals that are by themselves. Seems like the suspect has no interest in interacting with the victims, prefers to kill from a distance. The person is non-confrontational. Otherwise, they might use a handgun and walk right up and shoot them. But these individuals were all killed from a distance with a high-powered rifle. The seems to like to sit back and watch until he picks and chooses the time to shoot. This is very similar to what we see in an arsonist, where someone lights a fire, then backs away, likes to see the fire develop, and then the response that comes afterwards to deal with the fire. So again, non-confrontational, wants to commit the crime from a distance and then leave the area undetected. Suspect may be impulsive in the shooting of victims. So because there's so many people out there by themselves hunting and fishing that our suspect would have come across, it seemed like they had the ability to pick and choose when they shot, because clearly they didn't shoot everybody that they saw by themselves in that. And the suspect may like to hunt or fish, placing himself near the victim. Could be that the suspect was driving around looking maybe for a good place to go hunting or fishing, and happens to see these individuals and decides that now's the time to shoot. The suspect spends a considerable amount of time in the settings where the killings took place, signifying that the locations are in his comfort zone. Again, we see this in first-time killers and others that they typically start off close to where they live. We see it with burglary suspects and arsonists and people like that, they start off close to where they live because they're comfortable with that area. They know all the comings and goings, the egresses, the streets. And then they, as they become more confident, they start branching out further and farther away. We noted that the weekends provided the only free periods of time. We didn't have people killed on a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, or Friday. That meant to us that most likely this person probably had a job. Suspect maintained multiple weapons at his residence, had access to these, and may switch from one weapon to another, may have maintained those things too. Or, once he killed somebody with a particular weapon, he may have decided to sell it or trade it for another weapon of some kind. The profile that we came up with was a white male. And the reason why it was a white male was, again, because we had, this was a predominantly white area, rural area. You didn't see too many black people or Asians or anything like that in those particular areas. Predominantly a white area. So had it been, somebody of a different race or whatever, they might have stuck out a little bit, but nobody paid any attention to this particular person. So it's probably just someone that looked like the people that lived in the area. We figured he was probably at least 30 years of age. And the reason why we thought that was because this was a more mature crime. This wasn't somebody that all of a sudden just exploded, stabbed somebody, a bunch of times. This was somebody that took care to pick and choose a victim, make sure there were no other witnesses around. And then on top of it, they had the maturity that they were aware of crime. I'm sorry, the evidence that people leave behind when they commit a crime. This person was collecting their shell casings so that there was no shell casing left that could be compared with a weapon, for example. So this was, something that we thought was a more mature individual that was aware of this kind of thing. They would reside in the general area of the assaults. Again, easy driving distance, could come and go throughout the county areas. The first shooting that occurred, again, that was the one in Tuscarawas County, most likely indicated where the individual was from, somewhere in that area, because again, you start off in your, comfort zone and then you branch out. So we figured
for folks not familiar with the state of Ohio, just real quick, Tuscarawas County, I believe, would be the northernmost of these counties in the far eastern part of the state, very close to Pennsylvania. So if you think about an area on a map, think about an area near Youngstown, Akron, Canton, that eastern section of the state of Ohio, close to Pennsylvania and West Virginia, and kind of southeast of Cleveland, if that just helps give you a little mental picture on the map of where these crimes are taking place.
Right, exactly. And again, if you hold your hands over the map and make a circle, it seemed like the homicides occurred around that circle, and there was none in that in the center part of the circle, which we found interesting, but rather around the edges of the circle. Again, regarding the profile of the person, we figured that if this person was married, he had the ability to come and go as he wanted to. His wife wasn't demanding of him being home on the weekends. He could take off and drive around, go fishing, go hunting on his own and that. So again, there was some freedom that this individual experienced. He was
did the unit say he probably didn't have kids? I don't know any married man with children that had that much freedom.
No.
That would be my 10 cents into the FBI profiling unit.
No, we actually indicated that this person may be married and may have children.
And children's what gets me. How do you have that much free time?
Some people go hunting and that, and that's just a hobby that they have. And some take their children with them, others, that's just how they get away for after working all week. Yeah, it's, and again, they're probably not gone all day, so they're home for the kids and that at some point. But again, they're people like to hunt and get away, go fishing, and they may have children. So it's not unusual to have that kind of freedom and that. So again, typically that would mean that your wife or your significant other is responsible for the kids on the weekend, and that the kids most likely are in school during the week. On the weekend, this is what daddy does. It could have been mommy too. We weren't sure if 100% sure if it was.
Yeah.
Don't want to rule anything out.
No, we don't. You really don't. But most of the time, these kind of cases are committed by a male, and so that's where we were leaning. Felt he was comfortable in being by himself. Didn't have to have people around him. And that would indicate to us that he didn't have many close friends. Chances are very good he's kind of a loner and just likes doing stuff on his own. We figured he might have some of these traits in his personality: non-confrontational, patient. And we say patient because to be able to pick and choose when you're going to shoot somebody, you might have to wait for somebody to go by, another person to go by, or maybe, you don't like the situation that you're facing with right now. So you're patient, maybe move on to someone else to see, if those are the persons, if that's the person that you want to shoot, so you could pick and choose. You didn't see the first person and then have to kill him. Probably introverted, again, kept to himself, probably an avid hunter, might have inadequate interpersonal relationships. And we see that with people who don't have many friends and that they don't feel comfortable with other people. And so they may have inadequate personalities where they just don't communicate well, and, may have a cowardly resolve to their personal problems. They may not want to deal with things. They'd rather just let them go and let them, and try to pretend that they don't occur or there's nothing going on. Because of this person like to commit their crimes from a distance and that kind of anonymously, we believe that they may engage in obscene phone calls, commit arsons, vandalisms, and write anonymous letters. Again, just these are things that our profiling unit and we were able to come up with. Most likely enjoyed the solitude of driving in the rural areas, walking in the woods, follows media accounts of the homicides. Again, we see that with a lot of our serial murders and other people that commit homicides and things. They like to watch the media and see what the police know. And we believe that this individual probably followed media accounts. May maintain, collect the articles. So let's say there's articles that are written in a particular paper, and this person may cut those articles out because they're of an interest to him. Most likely would subscribe to some of these papers where the homicides took place, so they could follow the accounts of the investigation. And again, cut out the articles and then keep those for their own personal interest. May maintain the maps of the area. They may even put markings on the map of where the homicides took place. They may, depending on the kind of person they are, they may record the location, dates, times of the incidents, like a little diary. Yeah, I came upon, this individual. He was on a hillside. It was about such and such a time. The weather was nice. I remember nobody else was around, and, kind of keeping a diary of the whole entire incident. So that was something that we might be able to find later on if we ever conducted a search warrant. And then one of the things that we see is when somebody commits their first homicide, they tend to, it has an effect on them, and they realize the weight of what they have done. And this may cause them to do things differently. We see some homicide suspects leave town to get away. Some people start taking drugs and alcohol or using alcohol to deal with the emotions and that they're feeling. You know, after the first homicide, it's not uncommon for people to, I don't understand. Clark used to show up every Monday night and have a beer with us, but he doesn't do that anymore. So he's changed his behavior. And so that's one of the things when we put out our profile, is indicate that there may have recently been a change in behavior that this person is now doing that they didn't do before. So all of these things were put together between the profiling unit and our investigators, and we decided to go ahead and go to the media with this information. Again,
because you've still got the hardest kind of crime to solve, don't you, Harry? In spite of all of the information you do have, you still basically are dealing with random crimes of opportunity. So no clues as to motive and no connection between the victims or any apparent connection between the victims and their killer.
Yeah, absolutely.
And little evidence.
Yeah,
So
well,
random and little evidence.
and very little evidence. I mean, other than the bullet fragments that we recovered, you're absolutely right. Very difficult cases for anybody to try to solve with what we had. So we went to the media to try to generate some tips. We thought that by putting the profile out there, and oftentimes we don't do this because we don't want to pigeonhole who our suspect might be. But in this particular case, we wanted to put out to the citizens throughout the state the kinds of things that we saw that our suspect may show or possess, some of the personality traits of that. And again, it wouldn't be exclusively that these are the things to look for, but if somebody thought about, had some information that this particular person seems to go out hunting, fishing, they're gone a lot, and has some of the characteristics of the person that is going out and spending a lot of time out in these areas, and they possess some of these characteristics that we're releasing, it may generate somebody or cause a witness to call in and say, hey, I know somebody that does these things. They have some of these characteristics, and, I wanted to bring it to your attention and that. And so we, again, put that information out. We were getting calls left and right from people. Again, I jokingly said, but it's true. People that call in their ex-boyfriend or their ex-husband, and indicate that, yeah, they fit the profile perfectly. And just to cause them a little bit of grief, that the investigators would have to go out and talk to them, and they would know that somebody had called them in as a suspect. But we were able to eliminate each person that came up as a possible suspect. And we would be able to do that. For example, if the lead was somebody who lived in the greater Columbus area, since I was the investigator that handled this particular area, I would follow up on that lead, and I would go out and conduct an interview. And some of the ways we were able to eliminate that person was take a look at their work record. If they were working at any point where any of these homicides occurred, or if they were out of town on a vacation, for example, we would be able, for one of the cases, we would be able to eliminate them as a suspect because we believe the same person was responsible for each of these 5 incidents. So if we could eliminate one person from one of the incidents, we could rule them out as being involved in the other cases and that. And so we would get these names. I remember Dane would cover the people in the Coshocton County area. Our investigator in Noble and Belmont counties would investigate people that came up as suspects in their counties. Same thing with Muskingum County. And bottom line is, we'd all meet back the next day at the Coshocton County Sheriff's Office, and we'd report what our investigation revealed, and we would be able to cross people's names off the list until one time we got a call from somebody, and this changed the entire course of the investigation.
Wow. And so you are kind of in a position where, you're really counting on a tip, or, as you said at the beginning of the episode, somebody blurting out that they did something or bragging about it. So all that profiling work has paid off. It sounds like it's about to pay off for you anyway.
Yeah. And again, this is exactly what we hope for. And when we go into the next episode, we will talk about this tip that came in and again, changed the course of the investigation and started us on the right track, because
All right. And we hope you'll all.
Yeah. Up until this point, we had no idea who was involved.
All right. And we hope you'll all join us for that one as we tackle part 2 of the Thomas Lee Dillon case, one of the serial killers that stalked the Midwest back in the 80s and the 90s. I'm Clark Donley. Jessie Hemmelgarn is my co-host. And of course, always retired FBI Special Agent Harry Trombitas. Off the Record, an FBI agent's perspective. That's what the name of the podcast. If you want to continue to listen, and we hope you do, like and share.
Find photos. Yeah, sorry, I jumped in on you, Clark, but you can find photos throughout this episode and all kinds of things that you can visually see on our Instagram account, which is at Off the Record FBI.
All right. Hope to have you tune in for part 2 of the Thomas Lee Dillon case.
Off the Record, an FBI agent's perspective, is created and hosted by Clark Donley, Harry Trombitas, and Jessie Hemmelgarn. Produced by Jessie Hemmelgarn. Stories in this podcast are inspired by Harry Trombitas' autobiography, Dark Places, about his time in the FBI. Music is called Cruise in the Back and is available on Storyblocks. You can find this podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms, YouTube, and on our website.